All right, let us begin. We're looking at our Chapter 5 vocabulary terms. These, of course, are from Part 2. It'll be our second video. And so let us begin. Our first term, as you see on the screen, is profit. And profit, I think I've explained it to you previously, but profit is the extra money made after expenses are paid. For example, you own a business and you make $1,000 in one day, but it costs you $800 to operate, $800 for electricity, for goods, salaries, whatever it may be. So it cost you $800 a day, but you made $1,000 a day. That $200 above the $800, that's your profit. Now, of course, that's just a very simple example. But anytime you make more money than you spend, that's profit, and that's a good thing. Entrepreneur. This is a term that we use often these days. It is a person or a small group who start a business in the hope of making a profit. And, of course, everybody who starts a business wants to make money. That's why you go into business. That's why you're in this class, because you want to get college credit, which will help you get a college degree, which will help you get a better job, which helps you make money. I mean, that's the whole idea of the free enterprise system. Capitalism, as we discussed in the last video, is to make money. So entrepreneurs are people, it could be an individual, it could be a small group, who create a company, who sell a product, who sell a service in order to make money. And along the way, they usually hire people. The bulk of jobs created in this country every year are created by entrepreneurs, small businessmen. Our third term, the Gilded Age. Now, again, this is part of the chapter. The chapter is entitled Industrialization and the Gilded Age. And so the Gilded Age is a period of time between 1865 and 1900, approximately. 1865 is used as a starting date because that's the end of the Civil War, and 1900 is used as the end date because that's the beginning of a new century. Now, you could argue with historians it ends a few years later. Some textbooks go to 1914 when it ends, which is the beginning of World War I. The exact years really aren't that relevant, but it's in the last several decades of the 1800s, and it bleeds over a little bit into the 1900s. The definition is real simple. Immense wealth was made by a large number of people, who enjoyed a very lavish lifestyle. The book and the movie The Great Gatsby, and there was a new version of Gatsby made with Leonardo DiCaprio 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. It shows that lavish lifestyle. When we think of the Gilded Age, many of us, who are probably a little bit older than you, think of Gatsby. And Gatsby was a lifestyle of lavish wealth, but little substance. Anyway, so there was a lot of money being made. Large numbers of people were enjoying immense wealth, and they had this lavish lifestyle, but it was also a period of great corruption of political, business, and personal levels. And so we had, during the Gilded Age, corruption politically, in the business, and personally, a lot of corruption. The Ulysses S. Grant administration, Grant was elected president in '68. His administration is thought to be the most corrupt administration in American history. And so that sort of signaled the beginning of the Gilded Age. And you saw corruption at all levels of government, national, under Grant, for example, and local. Business corruption, businesses taking advantage of their employees or the consumers, and of course, personal corruption. Our next two terms coexist in the same person. People like J.D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. They were both captains of industry and robber barons. As I think Green mentioned, it depends on if we're mad at them. If we like them, then they're captains of industry. If we're mad at them, we call them robber barons. Okay, let's look at each one real quickly. Captains of industry were entrepreneurs, and we go back to our vocabulary term, what is an entrepreneur? Okay. Entrepreneurs who shared their wealth, and they became quite wealthy. They donated their money to various charities. Rockefeller, at the time of his death in the 1920s, was worth over $900 million. Now, you take that money today and put it in 2016 dollars, and one of the teachers here on campus said that it comes out to be almost 600 billion. That's 600 billion. Okay, 600 billion. So he, J.D. Rockefeller, was the richest man of all time. His 900 million at the time of his death in the 20s would be worth about $600 billion today. Just to give you some comparison, last time I saw the ranking, which is a month or so ago, I think it is, Bill Gates was ranked number 1 in the world at over $90 billion. So, Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, you can go on and on and on down the list. They donated millions and millions of dollars to hospitals, to schools. They built wings on hospitals. They donated land for universities, on and on and on. That's what made them a captain of industry. Now, what made them a robber baron was they were thought to be selfish, self-serving, and greedy. Okay, so the critics of the ultra-wealthy, critics of the captains of industry, they use that term, robber baron, to define the rich, and they thought the rich were selfish, self-serving, and greedy. And again, let's even go more depth and detail. They were corrupt. They were crooked. They had their own police forces. They were so wealthy they could buy political power. Literally, they could bribe and buy politicians at the local, state, and the national level. They were able to achieve great wealth through corrupt means, through, for example, creating a monopoly. Rockefeller and Standard Oil was a monopoly. At one time, at its peak, Standard Oil controlled 90+% of all oil production and oil sales and sales of all oil-related products in America, over 90%. That's a monopoly. That is bad. And so that's why, because they were so wealthy and they're able to use their wealth to gain more power and more wealth, they often were called robber barons. All right, let's go to our next page, our next slide. Our first term, refining. The turning, I'm sorry, I forgot to change that back. There we go. Refining is the turning of crude oil into useful products like gasoline. So you take crude oil, I'm sure you've all seen crude oil, the black, squishy kind of stuff. It's kind of thick. It is a liquid, but it is kind of a thick liquid. You take it and you go through a process and you refine it. You add chemicals, you take out different elements from the oil, and you create byproducts like gasoline, kerosene, and on and on and on and on. So the closest refinery that I'm aware of, I think, is in Three Rivers. You go up Highway 281, you hit Three Rivers. I think that's the closest refinery to us here in the valley. There may be one closer. That's the only one I'm aware of. And so they truck in crude oil, and then they truck out byproducts like gasoline, kerosene, aviation fuel, whatever the case may be. Our next term, Standard Oil Company, I mentioned that a few moments ago with J.D. Rockefeller, controlled 90% or more of oil refining in 1870. Not just oil refining, but Rockefeller owned a huge chunk of the lands themselves. He owned the means to transport the oil from the fields to the refineries, and then he owned the outlets. So he owned the raw material, he owned the means of transportation, he owned the means of sale. And that's what gave him that 90%, which of course created the monopoly, which is why he became so wealthy. Now, what's a monopoly? Well, there we go. A company having complete control or near complete control over the supply of a product or service. I would argue that 90% is pretty close to near control. Okay, so we're looking at having complete control or nearly complete control over the supply of a product or service. If you own the only hamburger joint in town, you have a monopoly. Monopolies are not good for you and I, the consumer. Monopolies are not good for you and I, the employee. Monopolies are good if you own them. But if you're a competitor, if you are a consumer, if you are an employee, monopolies can be very bad, which is the reason why monopolies are illegal. And we'll get into in another chapter or two the efforts by the legislative branch, Congress, to make monopolies illegal and to break them up. Depression. This is an economic downturn in business. It is an extremely severe slowdown. What that means is that unemployment is up, prices are up, productivity is down, and there are other factors. But when there is an economic slowdown, a severe one, we call that a depression. And of course, the depression that we're most used to, the way that we use the term the most is the Great Depression of the 1930s, which we'll get to in a couple of chapters. That was a lengthy period of high unemployment. In some cases, several years averaged well over 25% unemployment. Prices rise, and so people aren't working, and those who are working are having trouble affording what is being produced. Why? Because there's very little being produced, because productivity is down. Our next term, consolidate, means to join together. So if you want to consolidate your business with someone else, you would then merge those two. You would join the two together. And this was a common tactic of businessmen like Morgan, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie. They would consolidate companies. Essentially, they would buy them out and put people on the boards who would then vote to merge, to consolidate. So it was a legal way which they could increase their monopoly power. Laissez-faire, it's a term we had when we were discussing Tocqueville's 5 essential elements of an American. The theory that the government, and this is a theory, that the government should not interfere in the operation of the free market, of capitalism, of the free market system. Now again, this isn't really true. Many people misunderstand this. We're not talking about no government interference. We're not talking about zero government interference in capitalism. There is government control. There is government oversight. The difference in today's political philosophies is that one party wants far less government interference and the other party wants far more. Laissez-faire centers around less government interference. Again, I have used the analogy of the boxing match with the referee being the government and the two boxers being the producers and the consumers. And it is the government's job, the referee's job, to ensure that neither side takes unfair advantage. Laissez-faire is the official is not doing his job. Is not paying attention, allowing one side to take an unfair advantage over the other. That's laissez-faire. It is not overtly successful. It is not very good for the consumers or the employees, but it does happen from time to time. All right, let's move forward to our next slide. And I think this will be our last slide for this particular video. And what we're going to look at are the pros and the cons, the aspects of business that are good and the aspects of business that are bad. Let's look at the pros of big business, and there are 4 that are listed there, and then there are 4 of the cons of big business. Our first pro, our first positive, is that large businesses are more efficient than small businesses, and therefore, since they are more efficient, they tend to lead to lower prices. And so larger companies tend to, because of any number of reasons, because they can hire more people, because they can buy more, a larger quantity of raw materials, they tend to be more efficient in some ways, more productive, so that way they can produce more, which lowers the price of the good. Our second pro of big business They can hire large numbers of workers, which of course then leads to the lower prices. And so as a big business, I employ 1,000 people. Your small business, which produces the same good I do, I produce only hires 50. So I can hire more people who can produce more, which then leads to those lower prices. Our third pro of big business, they can produce goods in large quantities. I think you're seeing a theme here. They're all interrelated. I, as a big business owner, hire more people. And because I hire more people, I can produce goods in larger quantities, which then lead to lower prices. And again, what are consumers wanting? They want lower prices. Our final pro of big business, they, the big business, have the resources to support extensive research and invent new items. I have 1,000 people working for me. I'm making money left and right. I can now take part of those profits, one of our previous vocabulary terms, I can now take some of those profits and reinvest it or invest it into research. How can I make this product better? I can reinvest in the company and add a second factory or create a third shift where we're working 24/7 around the clock. So big business, because of the resources that big business tend to have. Why? Because again, they're selling more at lower prices. They're making more money. They have larger numbers of workers. They can produce in large quantities. They have the support system to spend money and time. They have resources to spend to invent, to create, to improve upon the products. Our cons, our negative aspects of big business. Our first one is that big business tend to have an unfair competitive advantage against smaller businesses. As a big business, I have more money. I make more money, so I can afford to advertise. Whereas you in your smaller company do not have the budget to spend money to advertise. I can advertise in local newspapers, magazines. Today I can do radio ads, I can do TV ads, I can do internet ads. You, because again, your company is smaller and makes less money, maybe you can only afford one of those. And so that gives me somewhat of an unfair advantage. Not to mention, I can hire more people, and I can afford maybe to pay a little bit more to lure your best workers from your business and bring them to my company. Another negative, another con, is that they, big business, sometimes exploit workers. Because I am so big and so wealthy as a company that the employees are less valuable to me than a company only has a small number. I have 1,000 workers who work for me. I'm not going to know each and every one of them. If I only had 25 or 50, I would know their names. I know about their families. And so if a worker gets hurt for me in my big company, I just fire them and bring someone else in because, again, they're just a cog in a machine. In a smaller business, they're more like family, and it's difficult to treat a family member that way. Our third con is that the big business, are less concerned with where they do business, how they do business, and oftentimes that leads to pollution and other problems. Again, as a bigger business, if I'm Andrew Carnegie, if I'm J.D. Rockefeller, and I pollute and the local city fathers come out and complain to me, I bribe them, I pay them off. I bribe state or national officials to pass legislation that benefits me. That makes it illegal to pollute except for me. I can pollute all I want. And finally, our final con, our final negative about big business is that they have unfair influence over government policies which affect them. Again, mentioned this already. I can afford to hire lobbyists to go to Washington to work on my behalf. I can afford to essentially donate large sums of money to congressmen, essentially bribing them to pass legislation that benefits me and my company. So because of my size and my wealth, I have unfair influence over the government. I am less concerned about the environment. I exploit workers from time to time, and I have an unfair competitive advantage. All right, we're going to finish it up right now. We've got about 20 minutes, and that's what I would like to do for each video. This is the end of part 2 of our chapter 5 vocabulary. Bye.